The deal was spoken over a scarred wooden table that had known more fists than paperwork. Late afternoon light slanted through the grimy window of old Mercer's parlor, cutting the room into yellow strips where dust floated and insects buzzed lazily. Jonah Hale sat stiff-backed on a chair that wobbled with every shift of his weight, his hat in his hands, thumbs rubbing the cracked leather brim. The smell of old tobacco and dried lavender clung to the air, a strange mix of comfort and decay. "One cow," Mercer said again, as if Jonah hadn't heard him the first time. His voice was dry, businesslike. "Good teeth. Still milking strong. She'll last you years if you don't waste her." Jonah swallowed. A cow meant milk, calves, trade. It meant the ranch might survive another winter. He had buried 2 calves already this year, their ribs sharp under his palms when he dragged them out of the dust. He hadn't slept properly since the well started coughing sand. "And the catch?" Jonah asked quietly. Mercer didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and knocked once on the half-open door behind him. "Come in." The woman stepped inside like she was already bracing for judgment. She filled the doorway not in height but in presence, broad, solid, wrapped in a faded blue dress that pulled tight across her hips and hung, loose at the shoulders. Her hair was braided thick and plain, her shoes worn at the toes. Jonah noticed all of it in the same instant, his eyes doing what eyes always did before his sense caught up. "This is Clara," Mercer said. "My niece." She nodded once, chin level, eyes steady. They were dark eyes, Jonah saw, observant in a way that made him uncomfortable, like she was the one taking measure of him. "You marry her," Mercer went on, tapping the paper on the table. "She gets a roof. You get the cow. Legal, clean, and done by morning." The words landed heavy. Jonah felt heat crawl up his neck. He'd known the world could be cruel, but having it laid out so plainly made his chest ache. He looked at Clara again, expecting to see embarrassment or anger or fear. He saw none of those, only a kind of guarded stillness, as if she had already endured worse offers than this. Jonah stood, chair legs scraping loud against the floor. "Does she—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Does she agree to this?" Clara answered before Mercer could. "I agree," she said. Her voice was calm, low, steady. "I know the terms." Mercer smiled thinly, satisfied. "Then we're settled." The paper slid across the table toward Jonah. His name waited at the bottom, blank and accusing. He thought of the empty barn, the land his father had cleared with hands now buried in the same soil. He thought of pride and how little it fed you. He picked up the pen. The ceremony the next morning was brief enough to feel unreal. No flowers, no guests beyond Mercer, and a tired-looking justice of the peace. Clara wore the same blue dress. Jonah wore his cleanest shirt, though the cuffs were frayed. When asked if he took her as his wife, he hesitated half a breath too long. Clara did not. "I do," she said clearly, eyes forward. Jonah echoed the words, his voice softer, like he was afraid of them. The justice nodded, declared it done, and Mercer clapped once, as if sealing a deal at market. By noon, Jonah was leading a brown and white cow down the dirt road toward his ranch, Clara walking beside him with her small bundle slung over one shoulder. They rode the rest of the way in Jonah's old wagon, the wheels groaning in protest. The land stretched wide and dry around them, grass brittle under the sun. Jonah kept glancing at Clara from the corner of his eye, unsure what to say, unsure what was expected of him now that he had a wife he barely knew and had never courted. She looked out at the fields, her gaze moving slowly, thoughtfully. "You've got good soil," she said at last. "It's just thirsty." He nodded. "Everything here is." When they reached the cabin, Clara climbed down without waiting for help. She stood a moment, taking in the place, the leaning fence, the sagging porch, the stubborn little garden patch Jonah had almost given up on. She didn't sigh. She didn't frown. She simply went inside. Jonah followed, suddenly nervous in his own home. Clara set her bundle on the chair, smoothed her dress, and looked at him. "I won't be trouble," she said. "I can cook, clean, work the land if you'll let me." "You don't owe me anything," Jonah replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it yet. Night fell early. Jonah ate in silence. the clink of spoon against tin plate sounding louder than it should have. When the lantern was lit, Clara picked it up and walked toward the bedroom. At the door she paused. "I need the night to myself," she said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an apology. "That's fine," Jonah said quickly. "Take all the nights you need." She nodded once and closed the door. A moment later, Jonah heard the scrape of wood on wood, the unmistakable sound of the bolt sliding into place. The finality of it settled in his chest like a stone. Jonah sat by the dying fire long after the light under the door went dark. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. Mostly he felt small, aware, for the first time, of how little control either of them truly had. He lay down on the bench, boots still on, staring up at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind push against the walls. In the other room, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched in her lap, listening to the same wind. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The door was locked. For tonight, that was enough. Jonah woke before the sun, his back stiff and his neck sore from the narrow bench. For a moment he lay still, staring at the grey light creeping through the cracks in the cabin wall, listening. No sound came from the bedroom. The memory of the bolt sliding into place returned with full clarity, but it no longer stung. The way he'd expected, it simply existed, like everything else in his life that had happened because it had to. He rose quietly, pulled on his hat, and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of dry earth and animals. The cow stood in the corral, chewing calmly, steam rising from her nostrils. Jonah rested his forehead briefly against the fence rail, a tired smile tugging at his mouth. Whatever else had been traded away, this living, breathing proof of survival stood here now. He worked until his muscles warmed, repairing a stretch of fence that had sagged for months, hauling water bucket by bucket from the well that gave less each day. The sun crept higher, and with it came a sense of routine, the kind that kept a man steady, even when his thoughts wanted to wander. He wondered if Clara was awake, if she regretted the choice she'd made, if she would leave the moment she could. He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the work. When he finally returned to the cabin, the smell of cooking stopped him at the door. Onions, bread, something warm and filling. He stepped inside and found Clara at the stove, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, moving with quiet confidence in a space that had been his alone for years. She didn't jump when she noticed him. She simply kept stirring. "I locked the door last night," she said, her voice even. As if, continuing a conversation, they'd paused. Jonah leaned against the frame. "I know. I needed to," she went on, still not looking at him. "I didn't know what to expect. And I've learned not to leave doors open when I'm unsure." He nodded, feeling the truth of it settle somewhere deep. "You don't have to explain yourself." She set the spoon down and turned to face him. Up close, he could see the tiredness around her eyes, the faint shadows that spoke of long roads and longer disappointments. But there was strength there too, a steadiness that hadn't broken under being bartered and relocated like an object. "I've been someone's solution before," she said quietly. "A way to fix a problem. It never ended well." Jonah swallowed. "I won't make you one." Breakfast was simple but good. They ate at the table, the silence less heavy than the night before. Afterward, Clara stood and began washing the dishes without being asked. Jonah hesitated, then joined her, drying plates with a towel that had seen better days. Their hands brushed once, accidentally. Both noticed, neither commented. Over the following days, a rhythm formed without discussion. Clara rose early and tended the small garden patch, turning dry soil with careful patience. She spoke to the cow as she milked her, a low murmur that seemed to calm the animal. Jonah watched from a distance at first, unsure how to feel about someone else taking charge of pieces of his life he'd guarded fiercely. Slowly the unease gave way to something like gratitude. Some nights the bedroom door remained locked. Jonah never tested it. He slept on the bench or the floor, telling himself it was temporary, that this arrangement was a bridge, not a destination. Other nights the door stayed unbolted. Clara would sit at the table with him after supper, talking about small things, weather patterns, crops she'd helped grow once, towns she'd passed through and never stayed in. When she eventually rose and wished him good night, The door stayed open. Still there was distance, chosen distance. One evening, after a long day of hauling water, Jonah slumped onto the porch step, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. Clara joined him, sitting with a careful gap between them. The sky was painted in deep reds and purples, the land quiet in a way that made him ache. "I didn't think kindness would come with this place," Clara said softly. "I thought it would be cold, or angry." Jonah rubbed his hands together. "I didn't think I'd get a partner. Just thought I'd get by." She glanced at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time outside the terms of the bargain. "I don't need to be saved," she said, "but I wouldn't mind being chosen." The words sat between them, fragile and honest. Jonah nodded slowly. "I'm not good with words, but I can be steady, if that counts for anything." "It does," she said. That night the door stayed open, not as an invitation, not as a surrender, but as a quiet sign of trust. Jonah lay on his bench staring at the ceiling beams, aware of her presence on the other side of the room, breathing in the same dark. The space between them felt smaller, less like a wall and more like a pause. Weeks passed. The land began to show signs of life. The cow thrived, the garden greened, and laughter, tentative at first, found its way into the cabin. Clara's body, once the first thing people seemed to see, became the least interesting thing about her to Jonah. He noticed instead how she solved problems, how she endured without bitterness, how she claimed her own boundaries without apology. One night, as rain finally drummed against the roof, Clara stood in the doorway of the bedroom. "You can sleep inside tonight," she said simply. Jonah met her gaze. "Only if you want that." She nodded. "I do." He followed her in, slow and careful, aware of every step. The door remained unlocked. When it closed, it did so gently, without the scrape of a bolt. And in that small, ordinary moment, Jonah understood that what had begun as a trade had quietly, stubbornly turned into something else entirely, not because it had to, but because at last they both chose it. If you enjoyed the story, please like the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.